of this meeting. So I would love to introduce to you Helen Fisher. Helen is, I would say, arguably the world leader in love. I'm sure we're all pretty good at love, but Helen is the world leader in love. She will talk about to us today about the drive to love, what is love, who we choose, and love in the digital age. So for those of you who do not know about Helen, so she's a biological anthropologist and, of course, a neuroscientist, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But it's interesting, she's popularized and studied the subject of love in the context of biological anthropology to the point where her TED Talks were viewed 21 million times. She's the most cited person about love in the world, which is a remarkable feat, so congratulations there. She wrote 6 books on love. She's also an advisor, if you're a social advisor for Match.com, so one of the key social dating platforms. And of course, she's based at the Kinsey Institute for Research. So without further ado, it's really wonderful to have you here, Helen, and we really look forward to your talk.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. And Viviana, thank you very much, and everybody else for organizing this. Anyway, I do study love. I and my colleagues have put over 100 people into the brain scanner. The first 17 were people who were madly and happily in love. The second were a group of 15 people who had just been dumped, just rejected in love. And the last were people in their 50s and 60s who were still madly in love with their partners. Not just loving them, but in love with their partners. Americans, the world doesn't believe that's true. You got to pick the right person. And so what I'm going to do is talk about all of that. So anyway, this is what I'm going to do, talk about what love is, rejection in love, love addiction. I'm the only one person in the world that thinks it can be a positive addiction. I can't get the world to believe me on that. I think it would have evolved for very important reasons. And I want to talk about what makes a happy marriage, what happens in the brain, why you fall in love with one person rather than another. And this is wonderful listening to both Catherine and Bianca talking about attraction. And at last, what's going on in the world today. So bottom line is, around the world, people love. They sing for love. They dance for love. They have myths and legends about love. They have operas, plays, symphonies, ballets, therapists, TV series, cards, letters, holidays. We are saturated. We are marinated in the world of love. And so people pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, and they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems the human animal has ever evolved. And so I began by looking at cultures around the world, and as it turns out, it can occur at any age. The youngest person I ever met who was madly in love was 2.5. His mother said, and this is not a sex drive, this is romantic love. His mother said to me that every single time a particular little girl would come over to his house, he would sit right next to her and just stroke her hair. And then he would be upset for about an hour and a half after she left. There's no real gender differences. Actually, I've got data on 55,000 Americans. Other people have data on it. Men fall in love faster than women do. Men fall in love more often than women do. When a man does fall in love, they want to introduce that person to friends and family sooner. Men want to move in sooner, and men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. So I've been trying to tell the women's magazines this for 40 years. They're dedicated to the idea that women are more romantic than men. It's absolutely not true. I mean, women fall in love certainly just as much as men do, but the bottom line is men are the fragile sex when it comes to love. I'm not talking gays and straights. Gays and straights both love. I'm not talking about who you're in love with at this point. I'm talking about how you feel when you're in love. And all of my data on gays and straights and trans and the whole pile of them, it's exactly the same. It's a basic brain system. We found it in over 200 societies. And as a result, I began to think, this is a universal human experience. There must be something going on in the brain. And in fact, my first academic paper on it, one of the peer reviewers said to me, he said, oh no, you can't study love. It's part of the supernatural. And I said, hang on here. Well, you know, anger is not part of the supernatural. Fear is not part of the supernatural. Romantic love can't be part of the supernatural either. So I began to put people in the scanner. But first of all, these are some of the traits linked with romantic love. I'm going to pile through this because I don't have too much time here. First thing that happens is a person takes on what I call special meaning. Everything about them is special. The car they drive is different from every other car in the parking lot. The house they live on, the street, everything is special. Then you focus on them. You can, in fact, before I put the people in the machine, I would ask them, what do you not like about your partner? They can list it, and they sweep that aside and focus on what they do. As Chaucer said, love is blind. Indeed, it is. In fact, we've proven that in the brain. High energy, walk all night, talk till dawn, high euphoria, despair, anhedonia, bodily reactions, weak knees, butterflies in the stomach, emotional and physical dependence, separation anxiety, you want to be together. I made up this term. Academics have long talked about frustration aggression, and I think there's frustration attraction. And there's a good academic articles now that when you don't get the person, when they don't call, when they don't text, when they don't write, you just want them more. Real possession, mate guarding, sexual desire, and the three main characteristics of romantic love is intense craving. Sure, you want to go to bed with them, but what you really want them to do is to call, to write, to ask you out, to say that they love you. Intensive, intrusive thinking, you're obsessed with them. You think about them, absolutely. Somebody's camping in your head. They're in their head. Highly motivated to win the person, and it's very difficult to control. As Stendhal once said, the writer, French writer, he said, love is like a fever. It comes and goes quite independently of the will. And indeed it does. So that began to make me think, okay, I can put people in the machine. I do think that it's one of three basically different brain systems that evolved during human evolution. They're all the basic mating, part of the basic human mating strategy, and all other animals, I say. Sex drive gets you out there looking for a whole range of partners. You can have sex with somebody who you're not in love with. Romantic love enables you to focus your mating energy on just one at a time. And attachment, that third brain system, enables you to tolerate this person at least long enough to raise a single child together as a team. There's many ways that these three brain systems interact. I don't have time to go into them, but if we can talk about it afterwards, I'm happy to. So I began putting them in the machine. And I was expecting a lot of activity in cortical areas. There is, but they don't all share that. What we found is activity in brain regions linked with drive, in the most primitive parts at the bottom of the brain. And as Catherine was talking about, basically activity in the ventral tegmental area. It pumps out dopamine and sends dopamine to many brain regions, giving you that focus, the motivation, the energy of intense romantic love. And what was interesting to me is that lies right next to the hypothalamus, which orchestrates thirst and hunger. Thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love drives you to form a partnership and send your DNA into tomorrow. And so therefore, we coined the term, it's a survival mechanism. It's a basic human drive. There's a great many emotions involved, everything from jealousy to fear, to anger, to all kinds of emotions. But it's a basic human drive that evolved millions of years ago in order to send your DNA into tomorrow. It lies right near the little yellow arrow is in the hypothalamus. The sex drive, we found activity there. And we found activity also in the, in long-term relationships, you find activity in brain regions linked with attachment. In this case, the ventral pallidum up here. So these are the three basic brain systems that evolved for intense feelings of romantic love, sex drive, romantic love, and feelings of deep attachment. So it evolved millions of years ago. I could go into, for example, a rat will have this response for about half a minute. Elephants will have it for about 5 days. human beings can remain in love very long term. If I had more time, I think I could, I would certainly have many times, trace the evolution of it. But I think that the human pattern evolved as we were descending from the trees over 4.4 million years ago. And in fact, I was traveling in New Guinea. We've evolved along with that the evolution of formed partnerships. 97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. People do. If somebody came down from Mars and said, what was unusual about us, they wouldn't be surprised at our cell phones. They would be surprised that we bothered to pair up at all. And indeed, we do. And what's interesting about that is I was traveling in New Guinea, highlands of New Guinea, and I ran into a guy who had 3 wives. So I said to him, I said, how many wives would you like to have? And I was thinking, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 10? Is he going to say 25? And he turned around and he said to me, none. No wives. It can be a toothache. They tend to try to poison each other's children, etc. 86% of world cultures permit a man to have several wives, but we are built to have one at a time. We also divorce. I have written whole books about it. I'll say very briefly that for millions of years it was probably adaptive to have more than one long-term partner. Having children by each, you're creating more genetic variety in your young, which led me to believe that the most important thing I could do is not take a look at happy marriages, but look at the people, happy relationships, but at rejection. And I regard that as probably, I mean, this is when people have, slip into clinical depression, kill themselves, kill others, et cetera, et cetera. So I began to we put 15 people who had just been dumped into the brain scanner. And I wanted to prove that romantic love was an addiction, a primary addiction. And indeed, this is what we found. Activity in the nucleus accumbens. This is the basic brain region linked with all of the addictions, all of the substance addictions, heroin, alcohol, nicotine, et cetera, and all the behavioral addictions, gambling, sex addiction, et cetera. So I've been able to prove that when you're happily in love, the addiction centers become active, and also when you have been rejected in love. It doesn't surprise me at all. This is what we found for the people who were rejected in love. What's interesting to me is when you're just been dumped, you're going to keep loving the person. You're going to keep feeling deep attachment for the person. 3 brain regions linked with craving and addiction. And what was most important to me is in the nucleus accumbens, it's associated with not only with the craving, addiction, and risking, but with processing your gains and losses. Academic term. No wonder so many people, when they've been rejected, you're trying to figure out, well, what did I do wrong? Who gets the dog and cat? How about the house? You're trying to figure out what you've gained and what you've lost. And indeed, the brain is enabling you or driving you to do that. We also found that time heals. Activity in the ventral tegmental area, linked with the oxytocin system, becomes less and less active as you get farther and farther from that moment of rejection. I think that all 3 of these basic brain systems can turn into addiction, but that's for another time. So, what makes a happy marriage? People have been talking about that one forever. The main psychological things, best known by John Gottman, a friend of mine, probably America's finest psychologist for this stuff. The 4 horses of the apocalypse are the things that you should not do. It's all good. Psychology, it's all good. But this is what the brain says. This is what's happening in the brain when you are in a long-term happy marriage. Oops, sorry. So we put people into the scanner in England, in America, and also in China, and looked to see what happens in the brain in a long-term, very happy partnership. And indeed, we found activity, as we had expected, in all 3 brain regions: romantic love, sex drive, feelings of deep attachment, brain region linked with calm and pain suppression. That's a little different from when you've just fallen happily in love. But this is what I wanted to know. I wanted to know about happiness. Psychologists give us all this stuff on happiness. What happens in the brain when you're really in a long-term happy partnership? So when we put these people in the machine, you ask a lot of, you get a lot of questionnaires before you put somebody in a machine. They're very expensive, as everybody knows. They're very time-consuming. You've got to really prepare the people, et cetera. And so we took those who scored very high in a happiness scale and looked at their brains. So this is what's happening in the brain in a long-term, extremely happy partnership. All these people were married an average of 21 years. They were all in their 50s and 60s, and most of them had adult children. We found activity in a brain region linked with empathy, a brain region linked with controlling your own stress and your own emotions, and most important to me, I think, a brain region linked with what we call positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like about somebody and focus on what you do, positive illusions. So with that, you got to pick the right person. And this is what Match.com wanted to know. I've been working with them for 17 years now. I was the longest paid employee. I've gone through 8 of their presidents. And they came to me and they said to me, why? It was 2 days before Christmas in New York City where I live. I picked up the phone. They wanted to meet 2 days after Christmas. Nothing happens in New York City 2 days before Christmas. I said, sure. I went down to this place. They were piling in. I couldn't figure out who they were. Was I the only academic? Was it a think tank? What was going on? And as it turns out, it was the CEO on down. And in the middle of the morning, he says, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And I said, well, I don't know. Nobody really knows. But we do know some things. We do know that timing is important and proximity. You tend to fall in love with somebody who's around. I would say that lighting, in my case, could have been useful too. We tend to fall in love with somebody from the same ethnic and socioeconomic background, same level of intelligence, good looks, and education. Certainly your religious and social values are important. Your reproductive and your economic goals. We call it a love map. Your childhood always plays a role. I'm not going to put smell in there. Catherine was very wonderful with that. They don't call it love at first smell. They call it love at first sight. As she said, a huge part of the brain is devoted to sight. And because we lived in the trees for so long, you're going to fall out of the trees. Obviously, this is more important than how you smell. But I began to think to myself, you can walk into a room and everybody's from your background and level of education and same degree of good looks and same social and economic values, and you don't fall in love with all of them. Could basic biology draw you naturally to one person rather than another? People will say, well, we have chemistry. What do they mean by we have chemistry? So I began to think to myself, okay, I'm going to go look at the last 50 years of medical and biological literature and see if there's anything that could give me a hint that why we would naturally be drawn to some people rather than others. So I went through lots of academic literature, and as it turns out, there's all kinds of a good 40 to 60% of who you are does come out of your biology. I think that both Bianca and Catherine have said that very elegantly. And one example is intimacy. Women, I'm studying temperament rather than culture. Culture plays a role, but I'm interested in your biology. And intimacy is an example of something that seems to have a biological basis. Women tend to get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel till we're face-to-face. We do what's called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. And it probably comes from millions of years of holding that baby in front of your face, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. Men tend to get intimacy from side-by-side doing. This is in Central Park. I was just walking along. As soon as he looks up, he'll look away. Probably comes from millions of years of sitting behind a bush on the grasslands of Africa trying to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. You can't be yakking with your neighbor as you're doing your job. And as a result, they get intimacy from side by side, doing very regularly. And of course, here's the problem. So, bottom line is there's variation in behavior. And indeed, so I went through all the biological literature. I'm not going to go do that now, but the bottom line is, for example, if you give L-DOPA to Parkinson's patients, creativity goes up. Gender studies, when you give estrogen replacement to middle-aged women, some linguistic skills become more dominant, et cetera, et cetera. So I went through 50 years of this data looking for any trait at all linked with any biological system. And as both Catherine and Bianca have shown, there's all kinds of systems in the brain. Most of them keep the heart beating or the eyes blinking. They're not linked with any personality trait. But as I kept looking, I found that there were 4 brain systems that are each linked with a constellation of personality traits: the dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen system. So what I did is I took a sheet of paper, 4 sheets of paper, and linked the traits on each of these 4 systems. And I thought to myself, I'm going to make a questionnaire to see to what degree you express the traits in all 4 of these basic brain systems. So I made that questionnaire. It's now been taken by over 15 million people in 40 countries. I then did a 2nd generation questionnaire, which I'm going to give to you during this speech. The only thing about that questionnaire is that it generally costs $300 to take it because it's a business one that I've developed. And as a result, if you do want to take it, please take it before Monday night at midnight London time, because then the link will go dead. But I didn't mention it to Viviana, but it's just a gift to you. So anyway, the bottom line is, because I was working with a dating site, I had to name these people, so lousy terms, but I got better ones, but now that 15 million people have taken, I got them stuck with them. The academic terms are curious, energetic, cautious, social norm conforming, analytical, tough-minded, and pro-social, empathetic. And indeed, a combination of all of them, all of these personality questionnaires that put you in one bucket or another. It's not the way the brain works, but the degree is there are patterns to nature, patterns to culture, and there's patterns to personality. And that's what interests me, these patterns to personality linked with these 4 basic brain systems. So what I'm going to do is going to go through just the top one of each one and then show you, I did a study of 28,000 Americans, who we're naturally drawn to, chemically drawn to. And if I had a huge amount of time, I'd say why. But the bottom line is, here they are. People who are very expressive of the traits in the dopamine system tend to be novelty-seeking, risk-taking. This is all in the genetics. Sensation-seeking, curious. They got the most interests. They make the most money. They also lose the most money because they're so risk-taking. Exploratory, and then they're not just jumping off bridges and mountains. They're going to the opera and the theater and liking poetry and coming to an experience like this. Optimistic, independent, self-reliant, impulsive. They're the ones that are walking to the barn, buy everybody a drink. Mental flexibility is in the dopamine system, open-minded, and the biggest one is idea generation. They have what I call creative intelligence. Not everybody has it, but some people have it to more than others. Lang Lang is a perfect example. Peter Thiel, I'm not going to go through these. Daredevil, flair, dazzling, bravado, extremes, ebullient, Gloria Steinem. Very different people, very different backgrounds, very different parts of the world, but the same basic biological sort of creativity. And they're drawn to people like themselves. Curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic. People want people like themselves. High serotonin people, observing social norms. It's actually, we even know which part of the brain it is. Well, I know all the parts of the brain. But anyway, they're not scared, harm avoidant, calm, self-controlled, plans, schedules, orderly, concrete thinking, literal and detail-oriented. And what's interesting about that for me is I was making a speech in, I'd written a book on this called Why Him, Why Her, and I happened to be in Seattle, and I was talking with a journalist, and I could tell this woman could not stand me. And not only could she not stand me, but she couldn't stand anything I had to say. And I got more enthusiastic trying to talk her into it. Didn't happen, read what happened in the, she wrote what she wrote the following day in the newspaper. I was convinced I was correct. I was in the taxi cab going back to the airport, and I thought to myself, Helen, you know what this woman was like. Why didn't you just give her the data the way she can hear it? All of the details, the ventral tegmental area, the eigenanalysis, the, the functional magnetic shower her with details instead of the big picture. And she would have understood me. And at that point, I suddenly realized I don't believe in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. I believe in the platinum rule, do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. Understand who they are, and then you can reach into the brain and work with them. And that is actually my next book, and I call it hunching, trying to figure out how somebody is, who they are, and then talk to them. You don't have to change what you got to say, but you got to say it in the way that they can hear you. So anyway, loyalty, it's a huge one. When you see the questionnaire, I can't remember exactly the way I said, but something, would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? This type cannot tolerate unloyal friends. Mathematically, every time I do it, they cannot tolerate unloyal friends. And the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's a real mathematical divide. And anyway, so Mike Pence, perfect example of that. He must have gone crazy with Trump, but never mind. Hu Jintao, Chinese, Queen Elizabeth. I mean, I'm sure she thought Diana was a loose cannon on the deck. And these people are also drawn to people like themselves, traditional, conventional, follow the rules, respects authority, detail-oriented, managerial. They want people like themselves, or at least they're drawn to them. High testosterone, analytical, logical, this is all, tend to be very good at what we call rule-based systems, math, engineering, computers, music. Music is very structural, experimental, exacting, rank-oriented. If you inject testosterone into a dove or a monkey or a lizard, they'll start to fight for rank. It's called dominance matching. Happened to me once. What they do is they'll attack, and they expect you to attack back. And if you don't attack back, they think you're weak. And indeed, when I learned my lesson in New York City, I was at a black tie event, and I was standing there with 4 men, and one of them was a guy from the Wall Street Journal, and he was taking Helen Fisher to the cleaners. He was just taking me out. And the other 3 were just watching. And I got smaller and smaller and smaller. There's 2 basic postural messages in the entire animal community, looking little and looking big. It's called crouch and loom. And indeed, I was getting smaller and smaller, and all of a sudden something snapped in my head, and I turned around to this guy and I said something vicious. And I don't remember what it was, but it was also funny. They all went like this. It's called the barred tooth display. Chimpanzees do it too. You do it when you're nervous. And all of a sudden I thought, if he thinks like a woman, he'll never forget it. And if he thinks like a man, he will respect me. And indeed, and he turned around and he said, Helen, he was so nice. And he's been nice to me ever since. So even at Match.com, we had one president who, this guy ate rocks for breakfast. He was a nightmare. And one time he stood on a chair and screamed at us, why doesn't somebody ever push back? They expect you to. So bottom line is we're not all alike. They tend to be emotionally contained. And fairness. Fairness is in the testosterone system. Empathy is in the estrogen system. Fairness. But what is fairness but balance? And what is balance but spatial? And I just find that particularly interesting. So anyway, and they're direct. They're the ones where you say, well, you get to the point with them. Steve Jobs, and you can see it in his face. His face is built by testosterone. The very heavy brow ridge, the zygomatic arch, the high cheek with the square jaw is all built it's all built by testosterone. Margaret Thatcher, they call her the Iron Lady, I think for good reason. Hillary Clinton. What interested me most is when she was asked why she was attracted to Bill, she said, "He wasn't afraid of me." Now I wouldn't have thought of that. And they are drawn to their opposite. So dopamine is drawn to dopamine, serotonin is drawn to serotonin, and testosterone is drawn to estrogen. And this is the last of the four. Web thinking, I coined that term. They see the big picture. It probably has to do with the fact that there's more nerve connections between the two hemispheres of the brain, and also some data that there's more connections between factories in the back and the front of the brain on both sides. So it gives you, I think, that very broad picture, contextual, holistic, long-term thinking, imaginative, mentally flexible, executive social skills, they are called, ability to read posture, gesture, tone of voice, intuitive thinking, theory of mind, that's the term for the ability to figure out who somebody is and understand them. And last but not least, empathetic and trusting. I put trusting in purple because it finally helped me understand something. And there was an academic article. Anthropologists have not figured out why you trust anybody. I mean, what would be the selective thing for that? But the academic article said that if you trust the right person, you save a lot of metabolic energy. And indeed, I finally understood how they can trust the right person. They think contextually, they read the person properly, they get into their heads, so therefore I began to see how a constellation of personality traits could evolve together. And so, last but not least, they're introspective. Everything has meaning. Just the way he sliced the lemon at dinner, before dinner for the drinks, means we're not having sex tonight. Everything has meaning for the high estrogen type. Harmony, they seek harmony. They'll never hit you in the face, stab you in the back, but never hit you in the face. A very different way of doing it, and emotionally expressive. Oprah Winfrey's a good example. Bill Clinton, I think we've had our first female president, Bill Clinton. Feels everybody's pain. The whole world knows he can't stop talking. And certainly Charles Darwin. Darwin connected every living thing in a magnificent way, of course. And they are also drawn to their opposite. As high testosterone is drawn to estrogen, estrogen is drawn to testosterone. So, as I said, I don't believe in the golden rule. You got to figure out who people are, and then you can climb into their heads and win. So, I think these evolved millions of years ago. You can see them in other animals. And this is my most important slide on this. What I did, I was able to prove that when you take my questionnaire, and I'm going to give you the questionnaire, it actually measures brain activity. No other questionnaire in the world can actually validate itself, because every other one, including the Big Five, if you're familiar with that, certainly the Myers-Briggs, they're made from linguistic studies to make a questionnaire. And you can't go back to linguistic studies to prove that that questionnaire is actually measuring what it says it's measuring. What I did is I went through the brain physiology to make a questionnaire, and then I went on to 2 brain scanning studies, fMRI, to prove that that questionnaire actually measures what it says it measures. And as it turns out, if you score high on the traits in the dopamine system, show more activity in whole dopamine pathways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't my idea. Some guy from business called me and he said, you got to great questionnaire. Can we make a company? And I do that. I won't go into all that. But when you take my questionnaire, if you do, you will get some of this. I won't go into that. And here is the URL. And what I'm going to do is after I finish talking, I'm just going to leave that up so that you can take it if you don't take it now. But I want to finish by talking about what's happening today. As I say, I've been for 17 years the Chief Science Advisor to Match. And for the last 11 years, what I have done is created a questionnaire, created about 200 questions. We're doing it this week. And then we send it out, and we collect the data on 5,000 Americans. We do not poll the Match members. This is a national representative sample of singles based on the U.S. Census. So we got the right number of blacks, whites, Asian, Latino, gay, straight, rural, suburban, urban, every part of the country, and every age group, age 18 to 71 plus. And indeed, because of that, we've done it for 11 years, so we now have data on 55,000 Americans. So what I have, and I just wrote an academic paper on this, what we're really seeing in America today is something that I call slow love. In my day, I'm in my 70s, people married in their early 20s. Now they're married in their late 20s or even early 30s. What we're seeing is a long period in your 20s of what I call the pre-commitment stage in courtship. And during that period, singles are just got distracted here. Sorry. Singles are learning more about themselves. They're learning. They're having their one-night stands. They're having their friends with benefits, but they're not tolerating it for long. I mean, I am crazy about the young. I'm crazy about millennials. You guys are really setting some very interesting paces for the future. But what's most important to me is I went through the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations on 80 societies, and as it turns out, the longer you court and the later you marry, the more likely you are to remain together. And that's exactly what is happening today. And I've long thought that the millennials in this room, you're going to have your affairs, but you're going to marry much later, and by the time you walk down that aisle, thank you, sorry. I just got married myself, I'm crazy about them. But anyway, the bottom line is you're going to know who you want. You're going to know you got who you want. Jesus, I'm a little distracted by the conversation. I'm sorry. Anyway, the bottom line is, what about the pandemic? So what I ended up finding, our most recent study was last July and August. And it was still very much in the pandemic. And indeed, we were anticipating, everybody was saying it's going to be a slutty summer. I said, no, it's not going to be a slutty summer. And what I really found is that singles have grown up. I call it post-traumatic growth. And I've got thousands of data points to prove it. But I think this is the most important one. In 2019, 58% of singles wanted a partner who wanted to marry. In 2021, 76% wanted a partner who wanted to marry. An 18% rise in people who want to settle down. So this slow love, I don't think they're going to marry any sooner, but they are now interested in a committed partnership. They'll get rid of what they don't want, keep at it, but we have grown up. Bad boy, bad girl are out, and singles want a committed partnership. And when I asked, when do you want it? Over 75% want it this year. So they are now in a rush. This, Cupid beat COVID, bottom line. So anyway, I will finish with this. I think we're moving towards a few decades of relative family stability. I think that the millennials and Gen Z are ushering that in. I think that they'll be more stable because it's much longer. So bottom line is there's three things. First of all, slow love, they're marrying there. The second one is they're meeting on the internet. There was an article out of the University of Chicago that said, if you meet on the internet as opposed to off the internet, internet, you tend to be have less divorce. And I thought to myself, why would that be? Well, what if you meet him right here? What if you meet him in a airport? What if you meet him at an art museum? What difference does it make whether you meet somebody on the internet rather than off the internet? And today, 40% of Americans anyway meet on the internet. Only 25% meet through a friend, and less than 10% meet in a bar or in a church or whatever. So the bottom line is today, it's the prevailing trend of meeting on the internet. So I did my own study of 5,000 Americans, representative sample, of those people who met on the internet as opposed to off the internet. And as it turns out, the people who date on the internet are more likely to be fully employed, more likely to have higher education, and more likely to be looking for a committed relationship. So the bottom line is, not only is love getting slower, it's going to make it a longer distance, they're meeting on the internet, they're going to have more stable marriages, and of all the things that is most important in today, I think, is women moving into the job market. We say that it's technology that is changing the world. Technology is only enabling us to do the same old thing faster. That's all it's really doing, is enabling us to get more information faster. The biggest modern trend is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. And what's really going on is we're moving forward to the kinds of partnerships that we had a million years ago. For millions of years, women commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables. They came home with 60 to 80% of the evening meal. The double income family was the rule. And for millions of years, women were just as economically, socially, and sexually powerful as men. Then we began to settle down on the farm. Men's roles became much more important, moving the rocks, felling the trees, plowing the land, bringing the produce off to local markets, and coming home with the equivalent of money. Women's roles became secondary, picking, weeding, pruning, preparing the evening meal, etc. And then we see during the rise of the last 10,000 years, a whole belief system, just as was mentioned earlier, that women were not stable, weren't economically intelligent, virginity at marriage, till death do us part. You got to, on the farm, you can't walk out, and you can't cut the cow in half, and you ought to leave empty-handed, or you stick with it. The rise of these constant, the father's the head of the household, virginity at marriage, women are as smart as men, till death, all agrarian belief systems that are disappearing before our eyes. It really started after World War I. Women started to pile into the job market, and we are moving forward towards the kinds of partnerships that we had a million years ago. So because of these three things, I am extremely positive about the future of the family. Thank you.
Helen, that was truly remarkable. And I've learned a hell of a lot about myself and maybe also about others. We will have time for lots of questions. Unfortunately, Vince has to leave in 10 minutes. So unfortunately, we might burst the bubble of your crescendo to hear a different kind of crescendo for a few minutes. And then we return to questions, and this gives you the opportunity to come up with lots of tricky and insightful ones I'm sure Helen would appreciate. And then we'll also then ask the other speakers to join and answer any further questions you might have. Thank you. yeah, I mean, Vince Abbracciante, fantastic. Thank you for sharing your passion, your love, and for inspiring us today. Unfortunately, Vince has to rush off to Stansted Airport, so all the best to you. Thank you for coming. Helen, are you wired, or you can use this?
I can use these.
Okay, so we have time for questions. To Helen or any of the others.
Hi. Is that on? Hello? Yes. In your division of the four types of characteristics, does sense of rhythm come into any of them? Or all
Oh,
of
how
them?
wonderful. I've never studied it, and I've never read about it. I've never read anything about it. Maybe one of you guys have an idea. But no, yeah, but very interesting.
Okay. That doesn't answer that.
Nobody's ever asked me the question. It's very interesting. I don't even have a hypothesis. Anybody else have a hypothesis? There's
Does
scientists in
sense
the
of
world.
rhythm come into any of those four categorizations?
Does rhythm have a sense? Do you have something idea?
I'm just thinking like dancing, lure of dancing, that's something that like...
Well, it's spatial, and it's rhythm, and it's attitude. I got married a year and a half ago at age 75, and my husband learned to dance. But, you know, and I taught, and the reason, the way I was able to do it with him is that he used to be, apparently 100 years ago, a very good basketball player. And apparently the coach once said to him, there's 4 steps to shooting that basket. And I said, there's 4 steps to the waltz. And he figured that out. He'll never be great, but he dances, so, yes.
We have a question here for Viviana, and then one at the back.
I read a study that women tend to try to stick with the same man, and men tend to be have more,
More
try
partners.
to have more partners because of evolution and protecting the babies. So a woman, how she protects the baby, she can have only one child every year. So she protects the baby by having a man who can supply for the baby and stay with her. And that's the way she protects her children. Men can have many children. So the way to protect themselves in evolution is to have as many children as they can, and therefore as many partners as they can. Is that something that you studied?
So that's the work of David Buss, and it's very well known, and I don't agree with it. I've looked at adultery in 40 cultures, and as it turns out, I think men brag, and I think women lie even to themselves. So from a completely Darwinian, first of all, in Americans today, under the age of 40, women are just as adulterous as men. And I would guess that the last 10,000 years of the issues that women have had with being adulterous, because they were property, and it was an issue of inheritance, etc. But in hunting and gathering societies, there's a wonderful study of 93 societies, and in the vast majority of them, they even think that women are just as adulterous and just as sexual as men. And I think this belief that women are less sexual comes from our, and less adulterous. And there's a math problem here. Now, every man who's sleeping around, he's sleeping around with somebody, and so I honestly think that it's largely a woman. But anyway, from a purely Darwinian perspective, to answer your question very logically, if a man goes over the hill, so let's go back 1,000,000 years. A man has a wife and 2 children, a concept of a wife, a pair bond and 2 children. He goes over the hill, sleeps with other women, has 2 extra children. Great. He creates more genetic variety in his young, and he passes more of his DNA on to tomorrow. Makes sense. Why would a woman do that? As you say, she can only have a child once every year, and in the past, not any more than once every 2 to 3 years. But if she goes over the hill and sleeps with somebody, she might have another child, but what she will really get is extra resources and extra protection. And if her husband gets eaten by a lion or whatever, She can step into a situation where she's got a protective partner. So it's an insurance policy. It's a way of getting extra resources. And with those extra resources, you can feed those children, those resources to your children, and they will survive. So I think there's different reasons that men and women are adulterous, but I do think that women are just as sexual as men. It's one other thing that is interesting that does support some of what you say. I once made a speech to a lot of hookers, a lot of sex workers down in New York. And there was one man in the room. And I thought, he's the boyfriend of one of these women. And then he came up to me afterwards and propositioned me. And I said to him, I said, well, I don't pay for sex, but I do pay for dinner. And I would like to know about your job. So I took him out to dinner and made friends with him. And he said something very interesting to me. He said that as a gigolo, women who like him keep going back to him, whereas men keep going to separate women. So that is in support of what you've got to say, but I think then the larger issue is that for millions of years it was adaptive for both sexes to sleep around. In fact, I would say, and I didn't have time to say it today, is the basic human reproductive strategy, I think, is a series of partnerships to create more genetic variety in your young, and also clandestine adultery, what I call a dual human reproductive strategy. And then with our big cognitive processes, we decide how we're going to spend our lives. Somebody else.
Thank you. We have a question at the back there.
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank you because I thought your presentation was really funny and knowledgeable. So for context, I have a boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. He's from France, and obviously I'm in England. And I broke up with him because it didn't work out. So my question is, what's the relationship between slow love and social distance relationships?
So I study that every year. And one of the things I ask these singles, I got data on 55,000, as I mentioned, and the vast majority of them do not want a long-term, a long-distance partnership. And then when I ask the question, what do you regard as long distance? They will say more than 3 hours away. Even with Zoom and all that kind of stuff, I mean, we are still a mammal. And even though people say, oh, we're going to have all of these, sex dolls and all this kind of stuff, the bottom line is we are mammals. And that touch, the smell, the sounds, the laughter, the spontaneity of a true partnership in the same room at the same time is something I think that we're going to have forever. So most singles do not want long-term a distance relationship.
Recently I experienced something really funny. So when I started to job hunt and I was making connections on LinkedIn, I realized it took forever for some CEO or HR to respond to me, whereas I changed my lane. I go on dating apps and I start making connection with people and then change that dynamic into a mentoring relationship. I find that easier for me to make a connection. So what do you think about making a connection in a professional setting? It makes it harder for me to truly build that connection, whereas there seems to be easier of a lane to go on a dating site and match with someone and have a dinner or a coffee chat and actually get an internship or a job. Usually with men, I find it particularly in white male, I find that more successful in my own personal case.
So just to clarify here, so you're better sex, but not better sex, better related. That was entirely unintentional, I apologize. I'm a little rattled here. But anyway, the bottom line is you're saying that when you meet the person online in a business relationship, it's more successful than if you meet them in person? Is that what you're saying?
When I'm sending out a message on LinkedIn or something, it takes forever for them to think that I'm a capable woman to do business. But then when I match them on Bumble or Tinder or whatever, it's easier for them to, okay, let's grab a coffee immediately tonight, and I want to get to know you. And now when that happens, I ask them about internship or opportunity. It's easier for that to happen for me. And I feel really bad to use that resource, like crossing the lane, but it's really useful. You know what I mean?
So you're basically saying that when you meet in person, it's more effective. I think that's what you're saying. I just want to tell you something about dating. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I think meeting in person, we're a mammal. You get used. And what's really interesting is that during the pandemic, there was a real rise in video chatting. Prior to the pandemic, about 6% of singles met online before they went out on a first date. Today, it's 27% who meet and do video chatting before the first date, and among millennials and Gen Z, it's 51%. So you guys, I'm assuming you're a millennial, are really using that video chatting, and it's really making an impact. When I ask what happens in the video chatting, they say they have more meaningful conversations, they have more self-transparency, more self-disclosure, that's men as well as women, they're less focused on looks and more focused on whether you're financially stable and have a successful career. So so 71% of singles actually vet the person. I mean, what they're doing to you is vetting you on the internet, and then you get out and you meet them in person, and they see more and more of you, and like what they say. So I think that's what's going on there. I just, people really don't understand these dating sites. They are not dating sites. None of these are dating sites. They are introducing sites. That's all they do is introduce you. It's absolutely astonishing how many academics think this is going to change courtship forever. Isn't it? Once you get out on the first date, you smile the way you always did, you laugh the way you always did, you parade the way you always did, you assess the way you always did. That's all these dating sites doing, and that's what's happening to you. I mean, are you doing the video chatting before you go out on the first date? You're not, but you're meeting, and then they want to get good. I'm glad that they're. The bottom line is that the longer you stay on these sites, the less likely you are to ever move the relationship forward. So, good for you. That's all I can say.
Wonderful.
Keep
Before
at
we
it.
close, we have time for 2 more questions. So one over there and one over here.
I'm sorry.
What about the even younger generation that seems uber committed to technology, and that's their only form of communication, Isn't that, it seems to me like that would be retarding the social prowess of that generation.
Yeah, it's a lot of people say that, these emotional systems are very, very ancient. I don't think you're going to change too much of the amygdala. I don't know, maybe Bianca would change because of some epigenetics, but the bottom line is, I really don't think that this is a drive. This is like thirst and hunger. These emotions come from, and certainly romantic love is a drive, attachment is a drive, sex is a drive, and then the emotions, just a little higher up in the brain, the amygdala and other brain regions, linked with joy and sadness and even curiosity, really, and et cetera. So I don't think that they're going to be tremendously affected by it. And certainly with this new thing of video chatting and getting to know somebody and getting out right on the first date, it can be an addiction. We know that, and I ask all the time, is this an addiction? And over 50% of singles do say that technology is an addiction. But, when you think about it, it's so amazing. People are scared of technology. In fact, I have a whole thing on it. It's here. I just packed it away. In the 1500s, they were scared that newspapers were going to overstimulate you. In the 1800s, when the bicycle came in, they were afraid that women were going to just drive off and leave the marriage. They were scared when the telephone came in, that there would be evil spirits going through it. The radio terrified everybody. TV terrified everybody. And now it's the internet that is terrifying people. The human brain has been exactly the same brain for the last 300,000 years. I don't think it's going to change whether you meet somebody through a text message or in the local bar. I really don't. I'm not at all scared of that. It's going to make it faster.
Helen, we have a last question, well, a potential last question over here.
Hi. So you've talked quite a bit about, obviously, romantic love, but are there any different implications and emotional features with platonic love? Or are they the same? Yeah.
Platonic love. I'm not sure what you mean by platonic love, but maybe feelings
Yeah,
of
like-
deep attachment.
like
You mean
friendship.
love that is not associated with sex or romance?
Yes, like that.
I think that's probably basically attachment. It's a basic, I mean, it boils down to attachment. I mean, I think that, you can feel deeply attached to your ideas. You can be attached to your friends. You can be attached to your animals. You can be attached to your children. And you can also be madly in love with somebody. So I think the different brain systems, I think they evolved to solve different aspects of our social cohesion and reproduction. And the different brain systems.
So, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I know some of you have additional questions, and I'm sure Helen, Bianca, or Catherine would love to answer this question just over lunch.
So I'll just end with one sentence. So, romantic love and attachment are primordial, they're adaptable, and they are eternal. They will be along with us as long as we survive as a species. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to synthesize at the end, I would like to thank all of our speakers for making this long journey to come here to speak to us various aspects of love. I've made connections, which are rarely does a neuroscientist, between synapses and circuits and behaviors of rodents to those of humans. And I hope that all of you have learned something too, and were able to at least relate to some of the things that give us our most wonderful feeling, which is love. So thank you again for coming. And let's thank all our speakers again. And just like before this meeting, we were hungry for love, and now I'm sure we are just hungry. And there is a light lunch served for everybody who wishes to get a nibble right after this. So thanks again for coming.